with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce tonight's featured creative, Darren Mills. And Darren is a costume designer, a hair and wig designer, which is so cool, and the Harlequin resident costume designer and costume shop manager. And we're gonna hear all about him now. So hi, Darren.
Hi.
We decided to do this as kind of like an interview format. So to start off, could you just tell us a little bit about your costume design process?
So the first thing that happens is you get a script. And what I like to do is try really hard just to read it for pleasure. So not thinking about costumes at all. And once you do that and you sort of wrap your brain around what the story is, then you go back and you look at it from a costume designer's eye. And you're looking at things like what time period is it set in? Are people wealthy or poor, or all the things that go into giving the audience a visual of what these characters look like. And then you go through and you do a costume plot, and that tells you exactly what your needs are. So how many costumes on who, and then you start researching for these costumes in particular. For the Elephant Man, there was a sort of an abstract element to the play. So there was, most of the costumes were rooted in actual Victorian times. So they were period costumes, but there was a sort of a fantasy element of this Circus Sideshow. So those costumes were sort of born in my brain. They weren't rooted in anything particularly realistic. There they are. So the play, The Elephant Man, excuse me, it's much more abstract than the movie was. That movie that was done in, I think, the late 70s or 80s, in that they sort of established John Merrick, who is the Elephant Man, as being a bit of a circus freak. There's a section in the play where there's sort of a barker saying, come in and see, the Elephant Man for 6 pence or whatever. So we wanted to create this sort of through line with these costumes that sort of come in and out of the play throughout the play, that sort of bring us back to John Merrick's sort of beginnings. So I just imagined, what a traveling circus sideshow would be like in Victorian times. And that's what I came up with somehow.
You said you make a costume plot. Is that what you said? P-L-O-T. Yes. Do you do like would it be called like a mood board?
I do. I'm really in, the first thing I actually do before I even think about garments, I think about color. So I'm huge on color. So I always have color boards. What I used to do is just almost do like clip art boards. Now we have wonderful things like Pinterest. So I, have taken my old form of research of doing, huge stacks of books up to Kinko's and just color copying for hours on end. But now we can sort of put our boards into Pinterest and share them with the other designers and the director and that kind of thing. But yeah, I always start with color and sort of when I'm reading the play, trying to figure out what the mood is and what colors I want to work with.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask on that topic of like color, are there any threads that run through, like if I looked at your portfolio, are there any threads that run through, or like, do you have any like signatures that you like to put into a production?
Not necessarily. Every play is different. And I mean, early on in my career, I used to use a lot of sort of butter yellow for some reason. And, yeah, not necessarily. I don't think you'd see like a through line of color. You would in each individual show, but not, my entire portfolio.
Okay, well, maybe that was a weird question. I just thought of that when you were talking. Yeah. Okay, so you're usually working in like a costume shop, like we were talking about, and on the stage. How was it like translating the like set to putting it in the storefront? I guess I mean, like, what was it like in general, and also like what was it like mechanically, like how was installing in the storefront?
Well, the play, I mean, you can see in the images that there was a lot of, you know, fog and lighting effects, and the stage was fairly bare in that production, and they used projections on a large screen in the back to sort of set the you know, the locations and that kind of thing. For the window, I wanted to try and think of how I could make it feel to be inside a circus tent, and so that's where I came up with the idea of doing the backdrop. The pink and white striped backdrop is actually supposed to represent the walls of what a tent would be. And when I was thinking about this project, I researched old traveling circuses in Victorian times, and many of the tents were that sort of vertical wide stripe, usually in red. But I went with pink so it would match the two pinhead costumes. So I made the backdrop, dyed the pink and the beige, and then I made the pendants up above. I made those out of the same fabric. And then for the floor, traveling sideshows usually would be set up in fields, and often they were muddy, so they would use straw on the floors to absorb the mud. And then often the seating in the circus was the bales of straw. So that's where I got the idea for the straw bales.
Cool.
The whole idea was just to be, you know, you're inside a circus sideshow in the tent.
Absolutely. What was the install like? Did you have helpers?
No, I did all myself.
Oh.
So I pre-dressed the mannequins. That was the longest part, was getting the mannequins, because I had hoped to be able to get actual display mannequins because they're so much easier to work with. But it was cost prohibitive. So I had to sort of just use like dress forms without legs and arms. So I put the costumes on the dress forms, filled out the arms with paper and padding, and then carefully arranged. There's lots of pins in those costumes holding the hands in place and all that. So I pre-dressed all the mannequins over at the costume shop, and then I just walked down the block carrying these pinheads, getting plenty of strange looks, and then put them in. It took me, the actual install only took me about 2 or 3 hours, maybe 4 hours. I thought I would only need one bale of straw, and I decided I wanted a second. So I went up to a Eastside Urban Farm store and got another one, but the actual install went pretty quick.
That's super cool. I almost feel like the mannequins you kind of constructed or like pulled together are more interesting than if they had been on like regular mannequins.
Yeah, I'm happy with that because I like that they look strange. They're supposed to.
I think that's why I thought you were like also a sculptor. Like, I mean, you are, but like you said, oh, that's like not part of your identity. But I think it's because of that. I saw them as like a whole sculpture.
I guess they kind of are.
Yeah. All right. Well, I have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. And that is just I guess I mentioned this at first, but where can we find you and your work in the future? Obviously, working around COVID, do you have any ideas of what's coming up next or what you're going to be getting back into once we can?
There's just so much uncertainty. You know, theater is inside, and you know, I don't expect to be actually doing any shows until at the earliest next summer of 2021. And I think most theaters follow what Broadway's doing, and Broadway has said they're going to remain closed until the end of May of next year. So when we come back, I don't know what shows we'll be doing, Harlequin will be doing. I imagine there'll be shows that are inexpensive to produce because for obvious reasons, budgets will be tight. So there's a lot of unknown, you know, I don't really know. I miss doing it, that's for sure. That's half my career. I'm a hairdresser by trade and part-time, and then I was costume designer part-time. So it kind of left a lot of us, you know, sort of a little empty in our creative lives.
Yeah, absolutely. That's for sure. I think most of us can relate to that on some level. Very cool. All right. And do we have any questions from the audience? Just
Darren, how did you do your hands?
The hands on the mannequins?
Yeah, yeah.
I sat there and I pulled gloves from Harlequin's stock, just traditional little women's gloves. And then I slowly filled them with foam.
Unbelievable. They
tore pieces apart of foam and just shoved it into the little fingers.
They look fabulous, by the way. And you know, I love this feedback hearing from other people in the arts talking about how, you know, if you had used real mannequins, maybe they wouldn't have been so interesting. And every day I've walked by and I look at the hands and I just think they're real hands. And then it wasn't until you started talking about, you know, you put everything together, all these body parts, and created a body. And they look so great. They really do.
Thank you.
So,
yeah, it was a fun project.
mm-hmm.
Doing that and shaping the legs and trying to mimic knees and elbows. And like I said, you know, everything is very carefully pinned together so it doesn't all fall apart.
I would encourage everyone to see Darren's work in theater. His costumes are absolutely stunning. So whoever here hasn't been to Harlequin or South Sound Community College, he's done a lot of shows there. I encourage you to check him out.
Thank you.
Yes, he'd be a good teacher too if you could get him on staff there, Nicole.
And I've actually done 3 shows up there, and that's part of the agreement when you do shows with Lauren is you do sort of take on a little bit of a leadership role with, you know, her class. And it was Angels in America. I actually sat down with the class, one whole class, and talked about the process. And everyone in her classes end up working on the show. So
That's great.
I definitely like teaching, sharing what I know.
yeah.
And in fact, Lucy shared with me, I don't have an MFA. I don't even have an undergraduate degree. I came into costume design, started by doing hair and makeup and wigs, and then slowly moved into costume design and worked with Lucy and another designer named Monique Anderson at Harlequin. And it was sort of a process of, you know, learning the practical things, but also, you know, costume construction and dyeing and painting and distressing and all the things that go into it. But
and now he's the teacher.
Yeah, just to be clear, degrees are not necessary, right?
Mm-mm.
Working on the job, like learning and passion, those are the things that matter. Degrees can be helpful, but not necessary. Michelle, did you have a question?
I did. I have 2. And I will start with my question. And I'm curious, Darren, you mentioned, you know, you mentioned a little bit, of course, like what the future of what you do how it might differ, of course, with post-COVID times, and because of the budgets are going to be, who knows, very minimal. Do you find it, I imagine that in general, I guess I'm curious, kind of 2-sided questions, like, is costume making usually like a really large part of a budget of especially, I mean, maybe what you're used to versus other theater type stuff, but how does that kind of tie in general? And do you find it more challenging or more fun? Sometimes like dealing with budget restrictions can actually be an interesting challenge because you find innovative ways. So I don't know, kind of just budget questions in general, like how do you find them either freeing or restricting? And yeah.
Well, budgets, I help Harlequin with the budgets of their shows. So they're based on the needs of the show. So say you have a 3-person modern dress show, obviously that's not going to need a huge budget. Whereas a period show with 11 actors and multiple changes is going to require a much bigger budget. We don't work with huge budgets. I think people would be surprised when they see the result that we don't have huge budgets, believe it or not. And we don't really have a fully operational costume shop, which means that when you don't have a lot of money in your materials budget, the costume designer ends up doing a lot of extra work to make it work. We generally have stitcher budgets, so we can hire some help with the stitching part of it. But in the absence of a full working costume shop, somebody who does craft work, somebody who does all the dyeing, somebody who does shopping, that falls to the costume designer. And I actually do like it. I've wondered what it would be like to work at a professional theater where all you do is design and do fittings. But then I wouldn't, I love doing craft work. And you see that in the display. I'm pointing over there because the display's right over there. So I love that part of it. I love dyeing fabric. I love painting fabric and distressing. So I mean, I would miss it if I didn't do it. So I hear what you're saying. There's a big challenge to working for a theater company that has very high production standards, but not a lot of money. And we all do it. The set designers do it. The props people do it. We're all very crafty individuals. And I think there's a lot of joy in putting a really beautiful show on stage with not a lot of money.
I think that shows for sure in your craftsmanship. I mean, you wouldn't know that looking at the work that I've seen so far. And I was gonna say too, I think it's really interesting. I don't think didn't know you that well, of course, in Olympia. I knew you before more as Darren, the hairstylist, hair person, and not the costume person. So knowing now, like, it's interesting thinking back, I haven't seen too many shows, but now I wonder, it's just another connection to make, which I love about Olympia too, right? The creative people we have in this town. But my other question is from my my attendee in the background here and my personal chef for the evening. But he wants to know, what's your, do you have a favorite show or a favorite, I guess maybe a double question again, like a favorite show and or because of your costumes or a favorite, pieces that you've made? And maybe they're the ones that are on display. But
those are some of my favorites. And the thing about those costumes is it's going to be really tough to work them into another show. They're so specific to the Elephant Man. I can't imagine another show where we would be able to use those pinhead costumes. So it was great to have this opportunity to be able to show them again. They sit in our storage unit and, collect dust, so to speak. But so it was fun to pull them out and steam them. They were very wrinkled. But yeah, that show, I did the women a year ago at Harlequin, and that was sort of like the pinnacle of my wheelhouse, the 1930s, 1940s era. I loved working on that one. Gosh, there's been so many. I've worked on so many shows at Harlequin. What show I loved, actually, it was one of my early ones, was The Mystery of Edwin Drood. That was in the summer of 2000. I loved that one too. It's hard, coming off the top of my head to pick one. There's so many. I mean, it's sort of like, I think one of the things I love about costume design is that every project you do is different from the one before. It's a different challenge. It's a different time period. There's more or less costumes. And so it's kind of hard to pick a favorite, like one favorite, because each one is just a new sort of adventure.
Do you have I'm a visual artist, so if you go on my website, you can see old images. Do you have anything like that? Because now I'm so curious.
I have quite a few pictures on I have a sort of a Facebook profile. It's Darren Mills, costume designer, and that I've fed in quite a few shows on that one over the years. I sort of dropped the ball when COVID hit. So I was like, it's just too sad to think about. But yeah, so if you have that option, you can see quite a bit of my work on there.
Great. Yeah, of course. I just had added you. I will actually, if it's okay with you, put a link to that on the video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect. Which also that little disclaimer about degrees, that is for any future students who are watching. It's so to remind them.
Yes.
It's cool that you're in higher ed. It's not the end all be all.
No, I mean, I wish I would have in a way, just to have that experience. And, when you go through that process, that educational process, you end up with connections all over. It's much easier to get work. And, there are quite a number of professional theaters won't even consider hiring a designer that doesn't have a degree.
Wow.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, I'm happy where I'm at.
Yeah, too bad for them. We are just wrapping up. But yeah, it was great to hear from you, Darren, and hear about your display and about your process. Any last questions for Darren? All right, thank you so much. And thanks everyone.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks Olympia Artspace Alliance for working with SPSCC Art Creative Something on this. Yeah, we'll be back next week.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you.
Good to see you all.